Hi, Don. Welcome to our Research Mavericks podcast. We are really excited to have you here.
Fantastic to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So, Don, to get things started, can you tell us a little bit about your background, your experience, and how you got into the polling or social research space?
Sure. As you know, I'm the director of the Siena College Research Institute. I'm a little bit different than some of the people who have jobs like mine, insofar as I'm a sociologist by training, not a political scientist. So I got into the field of social and political research, trying to understand the effect that processes, events, social dynamics have on individuals, groups, and institutions. So I came in through the portal of sociology and became more of a political scientist as years went on. I would describe myself as kind of a nosy person. I like to ask people questions. I like to know what you're thinking about when you're in the shower, when you're in the car by yourself. Um, how do your thoughts, your feelings interact with the dynamics that affect your life and ultimately create behavior? So I came in through that way. I started off doing a great deal of work with secondary data that other people had previously collected, and finally got my opportunity to collect primary data in my first couple of studies that were looking at the effect of sports on people's lives, the effect of recreational places, and ultimately got very fascinated with community well being and the processes that either do or do not hold communities together. So, a sociologist to start, and politics for me came a little bit later.
Got it. Fantastic. Tell us a little bit more about the secondary data that you were talking about. How you got into that? What is your relationship with that kind of data?
Sure, I was at that point I was at the University of Connecticut, which at that point was home to the Roper Center, which was where all old survey data came to be archived. So I had a treasure trove of data at my fingertips. Every poll that was ever done by Gallup from the very beginning, by Pew, sponsored polls in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. So I was a little bit of a kid in a polling candy shop, and was able to dive in and do reanalysis of these treasure troves of data. So if you took a look at issues like division of labor in society, for example, or what other covariates exist to try to point people towards what their ultimate political or behavioral decisions were going to be. I had all that data from the General Social Survey to even surveys that were sponsored by the Virginia Slim Cigarette Company that did a couple of very, very large national polls in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s that I used to better understand issues that included family dynamics, as I said, division of labor within society, and ultimately started looking at some of those covariates as predictors of political behavior.
That is amazing. So you're a grad student sitting at UConn in the library, reading through all this fantastic research at your fingertips. So that kind of motivated you for this path. Wow, that is such a great story. So taking that one step ahead to now, if you can tell our audience what kind of polls are you involved in at the moment, and if you could touch on some of the really famous polls that everybody is looking forward to these days, the Times and Siena poll as one example.
Sure. What most people hear about the Siena poll is, of course, political polling that we're engaged in, most specifically, as you point out, the New York Times Siena polls. It's an interesting story that I'll share with you about our relationship with the New York Times. We started about 10 years ago, we were doing polling in New York State, and we were doing New York State congressional races, New York State Senate races. And so my view at that point was that we should use a registered voter list as opposed to doing random digit dialing, which was at that point in time, the gold standard. And I had to go down to the New York Times office repeatedly and convince them that using registered voter lists, computing a probability that someone was going to vote based on their historic record that was available on the list, and using that not just as a screening mechanism, but actually as a weight, the same way that you weight by political party, age, gender, education, and convince them that that was the way to go. Fast forward to today. That's the method that we use with the New York Times. It's proved to be very successful. As you know, we were named the most accurate pollster in America in the 2022 cycle. So we went from sort of knocking on the door and saying, this is a different method. In fact, I had to convince them to publish my polls in 2012 to that being the method that we share with the New York Times right now. And many other people now have adopted that method. That is, of computing a probability that someone's going to vote based on their performance on the voters list, and using that as an iterative weight, the same as we use other variables that are available on the list. Now, a few people still use random digit dialing. Working off the voter list has its challenges, of course, but it has proved to be more accurate in all the cycles that we've worked with the Times from 2016 right on through the present.
That's indeed a great story. So, Don, talking about the accuracy, and I'm sure everybody is looking forward to the polls that you guys are probably doing now and will be doing between now and the presidential elections. Can you tell us a little bit about what are you doing different in this cycle compared to the previous cycles that you've been involved in?
The challenge, if you go back a couple of cycles, we do a tremendous number of state polls. We recognize that the election in many ways comes down to 6, 7, or 8 battleground states, and that's where we put a great deal of our emphasis. So, in fact, we're in the field at present with polls in 6 battleground states. Um, and as far as what we do differently in this cycle, we make life harder for ourselves, is what we do. Error tends to sneak in based on the problem of non-response to polling. We're a telephone shop. All these polls are being conducted via telephone. At this point, almost entirely cell phone. We're calling probably about 80% of the calls that we're making using the Voxco platform. Our to cell numbers, about 20% at this point, are via landline. That's a change from the last cycle where we were about at 70%, so we're even more cell phone oriented than we were before. But what we do is we put extremely rigorous quotas in place when we do a state, say, for example, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia. So we'll divide that state into regions. We'll divide the regions up by anticipated modeled turnout, by party, by age, by education, and we seek to fill individual quotas. So in a state like Georgia, for example, where we'll do a poll of 600, we will have as many as 50 individual quotas of different types of voters that we will seek to fill. So we try to minimize the threats, minimize the error that can sneak in based on what we have come to expect non-response, most especially non-response we have found over time of the most ardent Trump voter in those states. So that's what we're tending to guard against. We then correct those quotas by weights, but the weights are relatively small. We try to, the design effect, as you know, is the measurement of how much impact weighting has on the ultimate response. We try to keep our design effect, that is the degree to which we weight our data, as low as possible. This is another thing that I think is different between us and some other folks who are using multimodal methods. We try to have, our goal is a perfect sample, a sample that is fully representative, and minimize our weights. So we keep our weights down by having as many quotas in a state as we actually instill. So that's something that we continue to make our lives ever more difficult as we move forward, because that's what we have found to yield the most accurate estimates when we have completed these battleground polls.
Fantastic. What a great space to be in, Don. I have to tell you, I follow this very closely. In fact, I know. Is it too early for you to call the win? I read the latest poll. I think at least the August one. It was saying there seems to be a tie
Yeah,
without
I think
going to the specifics.
it's extremely close. Obviously, we have a volatile political climate, and this is an election that I'll just point to two dynamics. Number one, if indeed, as it appears, that we're going to have a rematch of Biden versus Trump, we have two candidates who have weaknesses. We certainly, in our polling, know that President Biden is polling at less than 50% in terms of his job performance, that his age presents as a dramatically important difficulty. At the same time, despite former President Trump having a small, extremely robust group of Americans who back him very strongly, he's got weaknesses too. Obviously, he's under indictment. And we know that there are any number of different voters who will be affected by the outcomes of those trials. So we have an election that we have two candidates who have actually greater unfavorability ratings than they have favorable. So the election to some degree is going to come down to which of those two candidates in 6 states can persuade more than likely the least engaged voters to make a decision to vote for one of them or another. If you go all the way back to 2016, when we looked at Clinton versus Trump, at that point in time, we felt as though there were about 17% of voters who we labeled as persuadables. They had very little opinion of both the candidates, or they were negative on both of them, so they had to make a decision. That group of persuadables is even smaller this time. And in states like Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, it's that very small group of persuadables that persuadables slash little engaged voter who, interestingly, is going to decide the election. The other variable, of course, is enthusiasm. Are these folks who hold these really crucial votes, are they going to decide to show up? Or to what extent are they going to kind of throw up their hands and say, a pox on all of your house? I don't like any of these people. So it's a fascinating election that's shaping up. Small number of states, small number of people that are going to make the decision, and we will be polling these people rigorously. We're in the field right now. Interestingly, in 2019, a year out from the election, we did a similar battleground poll that we found to be highly predictive of the ultimate results a year out from the election. So we're quite excited to finish this group of polls and see exactly where we stand.
That is fascinating. Let me actually ask you a question on the trend that you spoke about was pretty evident in the Clinton versus Trump election and possibly will be again. Um, how do you filter out the noise in terms of people who say they will vote a certain way and then either end up not voting or voting the other way?
Well, part of it is this probability. So we actually, as I mentioned, we apply their likelihood to vote as a weighting variable. So if you think about it, if someone has voted in every single election and we get them on the phone and they tell us, I absolutely will vote, you could think of them as a close to 100% probability. On the flip side, someone votes intermittently. We get them on the phone. They say, yeah, I really haven't been paying that much attention. Then we actually weight the response of that person down. So the weighting of the probability is very important. After the election, we go back and we check to see if the people that we weighted as highly likely to vote actually did, or the degree to which people that we weighted as, say, a 50-50 or a low probability, did they or did they not vote? And over time, we have found that we hit those predictive efficiencies with a high degree of accuracy. Still, there's a couple of different questions sort of implicit in your question. One is, do people lie to pollsters, right? Do we get someone on the phone and because their husband, their wife, their neighbor, might be within earshot, do they think that there's a candidate they either should or shouldn't tell us that they're voting for? We don't find that to be very active. We find that within a interview, and most of our interviews are between 7 and 12 minutes, the people who will participate in the interview tell you the truth. The greater problem that we have is non-response. The greater problem that we have is that some folks have decided that we pollsters are part of the problem rather than a value to democracy with a small d. And so we have over time found that within this current political dynamic in the United States, that ardent Trump voters, and these are folks, you take areas that Trump carries dramatically at rates of, say, 70-30, that voters in the most ardent Trump areas, actually, those are the places where we have the most difficulty getting a fully representative sample. That the pervasive distrust of the media spills over onto us. And so that's the area that we're most concerned with. So we have any number of other covariates that we seek to ask about. We ask people about their attitudes towards the media. We ask them about attitudes towards current social issues. So we at times will apply weights that include attitudes towards other variables so as to try to have a sample in which these folks who tend to be non-responsive, we weight the representatives of that group that we do get in the sample, we weight them up a bit. So that's a persistent challenge. Folks who don't do the degree of quoting that we do, who don't go into various areas. For example, some people will poll just Western Pennsylvania. We recognize that Pittsburgh is entirely different than the balance of Western Pennsylvania, so we will quota those two areas separately. It's more work, it's more difficulty. It drives my call center staff crazy because we will at times be searching for needles in the haystack, looking specifically for people who, at least demographically, represent more likely the group who are least likely to respond. I think maybe I went a bit afield, but I believe I hit your question.
You did absolutely, Don. Thank you. Really appreciate it. So you mentioned a couple of challenges in the methodology or technology, which is um, non-responsiveness is a bigger issue. The response rates, how to ramp them up, and we are continuously working on that problem. Multiple modes to collect data, etc. What challenges do you see on your side that research vendors like us should address, the research technology vendors?
The greatest challenge that we tend to face because of our commitment to using the registered voter list and calling people up on the phone is this non-response. Our dream is that our partners, like Voxco, like other members of APOR, the American Association for Public Opinion Research, can do a better job of publicizing to the general public that what we do is different. We're not trying to sell people anything. When we're conducting these polls, we are actually trying to aid in the democratic process. So if we can engender slightly more participation, that would be overcoming this challenge of non-response to some degree. it's quite interesting because it is oftentimes when we conduct an interview with someone, they finish up the interview and they say, I really enjoyed that. I found that interesting, informative, provocative. Um, that same person might have been really difficult to begin the interview with. So, I think that we as an industry have to continue to publicize that we perform a necessary and helpful function in society to try to uptick the response rate. We have a lot of friends, and we certainly use some web sampling, some text to web, various methodologies that are to some degree less expensive than straight telephone polling. Um, and there's always the danger with those other methodologies that they're a little bit less, the sampling a little bit less probabilistic. Um, that you're just not able to get a fully representative sample. When we're not doing pre-election work, when we're simply looking at how do Americans in general feel about climate change? How do Americans in general feel about abortion, aid to Ukraine? We will do a blended methodological poll that will include web panel and phone. Um, and then we'll include a weight for probability of being selected. Over time, we have felt satisfied with those polls for general information. But when it comes down to the pre-election polling, where even though we'll publish a poll that have a margin of error, let's say a ±3, ±4, we know that the consumers of those polls expect us to hit these polls right on the number. So we continue to stay with the methodology in general that we use, the highly quoted registered voter list telephone polling. At this point, we're still getting it done sufficiently within budget. I'm concerned that as costs continue to rise, that fewer and fewer of us are going to be able to do that. There is an idea afloat to create sort of a pooling of data. That would be extraordinary if we as an industry, and certainly Voxco could be a leader of that, because there are so many polling shops that of course enjoy the use of Voxco technology, that you might be situated at a point where you could be helpful / instrumental in creating some pooling of data, which would allow more shops to utilize really cleanly collected representative data via phone, and not each shop needing to figure out, how much web do I need to put in, how much text to web do I need to put in order to hit my numbers.
That is fantastic. So, couple things. We'll take this offline, Don, but I really like the idea to explore further the pooling of data concept. But in general, so Abhay, our VP of Marketing, and I, we will take it upon us to publicize this as much as possible. We'll continue doing that, and I think we should probably do a panel at APOR at the in the upcoming conference, because what you guys do is so crucial to the functioning of our democracy, right? It is critical. So I will definitely make it my mission to help further this cause.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that'd be an exciting panel. I'd love to be part of it. Sometimes it drives you a little crazy, when you're coming down the last 6 weeks before an election, and you see that 5 different high quality shops have done a poll of Wisconsin, for example, and everybody's publishing it. And everybody's resources are stretched. That if we had sort of a United Nations of polling that would allow us to pool some of this data, and then we could do our own independent analyses. We have in our polling with the New York Times Siena poll, we have at times shared our data with other shops, because they might weight it differently than us. I mean, that's reasonable people can come up with slightly different numbers. using the same data set. But if we could collectively generate the data set, I think that would benefit ultimately polling shops, the industry, and the consumer of this information.
Fantastic. No, looking forward to it, Don. Um, I want to ask you a couple more questions before we wrap up. What excites you most in the polling space today? It is very lively, right? Especially in these times. What are you most excited about?
Well, I'm excited about. It's a little bit of like the Dickens novel. It's the best of times and the worst of times, um, because on the one hand, we face any number of different challenges. We've spoken about non-response. Um, we face a challenge of whether all polls are the same or not. Anybody who logs on to SurveyMonkey and can get people to respond to their questions can call themselves a pollster. But in the face of that, there's also never been a greater interest in and need for high quality polling. I personally believe that the role of polling uh, is to contribute to our democratic process. So many of us, of course, fall victim to believing that which we believe, that way that we're going to vote or our family's going to vote is the only way. And many people in a highly partisan, highly siloed society simply don't get information that is objective from people that are not like them. We perform that function. We accurately measure every different type of person from every different geography, and then we provide that information to the general public. That's crucial for a functioning of democracy, especially in a time where many people would just simply discount um, information, opinions that don't mesh with theirs. So I think that I'm excited about how important a function we perform. And I think that there are many folks within this space who are truly dedicated to gathering nonpartisan, non biased information and providing it. Secondly, I think there are so many other uses beyond the political space for polling, and we're thrilled to be engaged in some of that. So, for example, we do a tremendous amount of work in the area of community well being. If you take the abstract concept of a healthy community, what are the ingredients that make one region, one city, one state healthy, where people can live their lives successfully in a safe and productive environment? We actually operationalize that. We seek to measure the individual indicators that point to a region being vibrant and successful, whether that be the quality of local services, the presence or absence of discrimination, the degree of civic engagement practiced by the citizens. We measure that, and then we provide that back to the community so that they can decide how to take actions to make their area, whether it's New York State, Florida, the entire country, Canada, how they can put that into action. So we believe that polling is a tool that not only can benefit democracy writ large, but to potentially benefit the quality of life of average citizens. And we do that kind of work all the time. We do that work in communities. We do that work on college campuses. We do that work relative to an issue, say, like climate change and sustainability. We think that the degree of accuracy available to us as pollsters can do a great deal to make the world that we live in a better place.
100%. 100% agree with you. So, Don, last question before we wrap up the call. Do you have any advice for the budding pollsters or researchers out there?
Sure. I mean, I think that there's some specific things. Be transparent. Tell other people exactly what you're doing, how you're doing it, and be open to the feedback. Educate the audience as much as possible. There's a piece that I wrote some years ago that was titled The Zone of Ambivalence, but within it, I talk about the 4P process and how, as pollsters, we're nested in this environment where we're constantly interacting with three other P's: the public, the press, and politicians. And a budding pollster has got to recognize that, they are constantly in that environment, in that interaction, measuring the public's opinions, behaviors, and attitudes, um, expressing it through the press, interacting with politicians and other stakeholders who may or may not take action relative to it. And we actually have the smallest megaphone. We're the measurement vehicle. But the recognition that you exist in that dynamic 4P process is something that budding pollsters, I would suggest, keep in mind and forge the appropriate relationships so as to provide the information that we gather in a way that it can not just make headlines, not just get a splash, but rather be available to be used for collective good. I mean, we did a project a couple of years ago. We called it the American Values Study, and we were trying to find the degree to which Americans share a set of underlying values, despite the fact that they express hyperpartisanship. Um, I'd like to see more people do work along those lines that we can build upon to promote the quality of life in our communities and the health of our democracy. I think it's a great time to jump into this field. Be transparent, share your work, and I think that it's always exciting to measure the attitudes, opinions, and beliefs of citizens and then display that for the general public.
Fantastic. Don, thank you so much for your advice. Thank you so much for taking the time today. Before we finalize the session here, I would love to invite you for a panel interview that we want to do with our Research Maverick guests that have come to date. And Abe will invite you for the session, but we really look forward to talking to you again. Um, so look forward to talking again. Abe, is there anything you want me to ask Don? Don, is there anything you want me to ask before we wrap up the podcast?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. I look forward to keeping it going. There's any number of different projects we didn't have a chance to talk about today. I tremendously value our longstanding relationship with Voxco, and I think that Voxco is one of the key players in this space, and I very much appreciate that you're devoting your energy towards using your position to make polling a more democratic and fruitful process for us all.
Absolutely. Listen, we value Siena as a long-time partner. We want to continue this partnership for decades to come. So, really excited and thrilled to be here with you today, but as a partner in this bubbling and vivacious polling community that we have. And to your point, I will come back to you. We will organize something separately because this is just scratching the surface. There's so much to talk about, and let me think about a forum. One is a panel interview that we spoke about. One is an A4 panel. So, Abhay, let's look into that. Uh, we'll get back to you if we can bring, a couple of pollsters from our Voxco community, if this is something that could be interesting for you. So we can talk about different methodologies and, of course, non-proprietary information. Could
Sure.
that be of interest to you?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think you guys sit at a really great nexus point to be the convener of that sort of process, and I think that could be very fruitful.
Awesome. So thank you once again, Don. Really appreciate it.